an outrageous amount of footage of putting up the siding. Once I get around to making time-lapse videos, you'll really get an idea of just how much. We were just barely getting it done before bad weather hit, and there were a few days where we worked past dark. Jackie actually quit her job at this point so that we could make full use of the days and get this done. We went super hard getting the siding finished. We ended up fully going with cedar siding, but that wasn't our first choice. Actually, we originally had planned to use a combination of paneling and metal, then changed our minds and decided on board and batten and pine tongue and groove, and we started down that path before scrapping that and just going all in with the cedar. Cedar is not cheap, but the peace of mind knowing the house is well protected and the comparative ease of installation eventually sold us on it. We started with the back end of the house since it would be hidden and the boards were easy, straightforward lengths to cut.
So how's she going?
I don't know. I don't know why it's brown.
Because it's transparent brown.
And I don't know if I'm putting it on properly because
Neither of us had ever stained anything before, so there was a bit of a learning curve on getting it applied right. We had picked up what we thought was a clear stain, but it ended up being a lot oranger than we liked. We used it only on the backs of the boards. We gave every board a single coat on the back and 2 coats on the front. The second coats went on really quickly, especially as we got better at it. Unfortunately, it had been raining regularly, so when we bought the cedar bevel siding, a lot of it was damp. We got lucky and had a few nice sunny days, so we basically started a rotation. First, we'd lay out as many boards as we could in the sun to let them dry, flipping them once the first side was good. The boards each had a fuzzy side and a smooth side, so we focused on getting the fuzzy side dry first, as that would be the back and thus would be getting stained first. Then we'd measure, cut, test fit, cut again if needed, and apply a coat of stain, working everything in batches and having little stations each for drying, staining, and cutting. The boards came in 16-foot lengths, and since the tiny house is only 16 feet long, it meant we wouldn't need to butt them together anywhere, which was pretty appealing. Some of the first cuts we needed to make though were around the wheel wells, which meant being as accurate as possible with the jigsaw. We ended up making a cardboard cutout of the wheel well curve, and it didn't do too bad of a job. There was a lot of fiddling around with it to make sure we weren't being stupid. Honestly though, we didn't do even close to a perfect job. At the end of the day, we were able to split differences here and there, and using some high quality black caulking was all it took to leave it looking surprisingly good. We generally aimed for a 1/16 to an 1/8 inch gap between the siding and trim to allow for expansion, and we would test fit relentlessly. One of the challenges we encountered as we started to get into the thick of it was losing track of which boards went where. We started numbering them early on, but sort of fell out of habit as we got moving, and there were a few confusing moments trying to figure out what we'd done. We actually missed a board entirely, which screwed us up pretty bad one day, as we had to go buy another one, cut it, stain it, and wait for it to dry. The more organized you can be, the better. We were trying to get it done really quickly, so it was chaos as we had boards all over the place in various stages of completeness. We attempted to prioritize the longest boards because they needed more space to dry after staining, and we were dancing with the weather. Shorter pieces could always be stained and left to dry in the garage, but 16-footers would not fit. The cutting process wasn't too hard. Despite rushing, we took our time to get most of it right. There was only one major error.
Okay, so when you're stupid, this is what happens. We've got some glue on there. We're using the drill to steady it in place because you can't get your fingies in there. And then you just slowly slip her in like a glove. Not too far. And rest it in place.
Alright, so once a board was cut, it was time to stain. As you've no doubt noticed, we went with green for the bottom third of the house and a clear tone for the rest. We'd give the boards a quick light sanding, especially around the edges that were cut. We'd then give the fuzzy side of the boards one somewhat thicker coat. The method we came up with was to have one person apply a generous amount of stain with a roller, and then the other would follow it up with a brush to work it into the wood and make it even. The fuzzy side took way more effort to get stained, but the smooth side was actually quite easy, and we put 2 coats on that as it was going to be facing outwards. We needed to be pretty careful with a few of the boards because we cut quite close to the edge. We'll inevitably get questions about whether or not we used a story pole. What's a story pole? I'll link to a good description below, but it's basically a way of figuring out how best to lay out your siding to avoid cutting too close to edges. Like this piece. The answer is yes, we used one, and we realized after that no matter how we did it, we'd end up with at least one stupid piece like this. So we said screw it and started with a full board on the bottom since it would look nice. Once these boards were stained, it was time to attach them to the house. As I mentioned earlier, we started on the back end because it was the most straightforward section to practice on. Corner trim pieces were all level, so we used the bottom of them as our guide, measuring up each and making little pencil marks to go off of. The boards were considered 1x8s, so that meant they would have a 6-inch reveal. We almost forgot about the starter strip that needed to go on. Luckily, we had some leftover cedar bevel siding from when we made the sloped sills for the windows, so we ripped off a 2-inch strip from the thin side using a table saw and tacked it on. The starter strip is there to give the bottom piece of siding the same finished angle as the rest, since it would otherwise not stick out as far on its bottom edge since it doesn't have another piece of siding behind it, the way each subsequent board will have. When attaching the boards, we only used a couple of nails initially just to hold them all on. These boards were to be face nailed 2 inches up from the bottom. The nails we used were labeled as siding nails and aren't supposed to rust. They freaking better not rust. So we actually drilled a pilot hole for all the nails. We really did not want any boards to split or get crushed in any way, and it made driving the nails, which we did all by hand, much easier. To keep the location of the nails consistent, we used a speed square and a tape measure to measure up 2 inches from the bottom and over as far as needed to reach the stud. Our rain screen strips were theoretically over top the studs, so that's what we went off. If you go inside the house, you can easily tell we didn't always hit the studs. Oh well. For the pieces around the wheel wells, we actually found it easier to loosely attach the second board from the bottom first, then slip the bottom board up underneath and get the entire curve of the wheel well lined up like that. We just slipped some shims in as we were tacking on the board, and that gave us lots of space. But wait, you forgot something.
Oh my god. Starter strips.
Holy idiots! Build a tiny house, it's your one job.
At first, we didn't use a string line. We used a combination of pencil marks on the corner trim and measuring up from the previously installed boards. While the corner trim marks kept us on track, things got slightly out of square in the middle of the long back side of the house.
Okay, so we're about to start the siding on the front of our house today. We just finished the back, and we realized when we got to the top, where the last piece runs along the fascia, it was actually uneven on either side. One was lower than the other side. That was a result of basically measuring off previous boards to get the distance on either end. So we were measuring the same distance and going up, but the problem was that our first board was inaccurate, so we created a 1/4 inch difference by the time we got to the top. So what we're doing on the front this time to correct that problem is running a string line from one corner all the way to the other end. And using this method seems to be a lot more accurate. We've noticed our marks on the door are incorrect because we measured and marked those based on a board that was incorrect. So as you can see right here, this string line, I don't know if you can tell on the camera, but you can see the piece that we have there is actually a little bit higher on this side by the door than it is on the corner. And that was because the piece that we measured by the door at the bottom was not where it should have been. So the marks on the door were inaccurate.
The string line method worked nicely, and we really should have been smart enough to use it all along. The back really isn't bad though. We noticed it only because we were being so critical. Another little note about planning which boards go where.
It's a little darker there on the left, those three at the bottom of the brown. That's because they were all cut out of the same board, and that board is a bit darker. So make note of that if you don't want a dark patch somewhere in your house. Once the rest of it's up, it's probably going to balance out. But we did have to think about it.
And that was it for the bevel siding. We went back around later and added nails at every stud, as well as shorter nails in places where there wasn't a stud but still felt a nail would be a good idea. As we were putting up the boards, we made sure to use at least one nail in each stud somewhere on each wall so that we'd have a reference later. If I was to build another tiny house, I think I'd come up with some kind of a way to keep a very obvious indication of exactly where the studs are located. Maybe a thin piece of wood tacked onto the fascia that you could remove later, with simple markings that you could use as a reference right up until the exterior is complete. Oh well, live and learn. In the next video, I'll go over the final bit of exterior cladding, the cedar shakes. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and leave a comment and subscribe if you're new. The description below has links to the Rookie Roost social media and website, as well as any extra or relevant information to do with this part of the build. See you next time at the Roost.